Hey everybody, this is me, Robert, and this is the first in a series of videos we're going to make about featured blog posts on Introvert's Guide to a Wealthy Life.com. We're just going to dig in a little deeper to the topics we get into on the blog post, maybe expand on them or focus on a certain aspect of the blog post that I think needs more attention. But first, we're just going to take a moment to let you know that the book, An Introvert's Guide to Wealth, is available now on Amazon in Kindle, paperback, and hardcover editions. So I know there's a lot of us out there that still like holding on to physical copies of books and can't quite get into reading a full-size, self-help book on our cell phones. So I can put a link in the video here and we'll send you right over to that, or you can click up on the right-hand side of your screen where it says buy the book on Amazon. So, since this is the first in the series, I think the best place to start would be to talk about exactly what an introvert is. There's a lot of confusion and misinformation about that out there on the internet. A lot of people confuse it with shyness. A lot of people confuse it with high sensitivity. A lot of people confuse it with just, quietness or social anxiety. And well, all of that can sort of factor into, individual personality traits that an introvert might have. It doesn't really get down to the key of what an introvert really is. So, let's dig in. And I do have to tell you that this blog post and this video and really the section in the book was inspired by my own personal experience with people from all walks of life that are clearly not introverts, and they say something like, oh, I'm such an introvert, when they mention how they don't like to be around a certain group of people, or how they don't like dealing with the public, say in a customer service sort of environment. And that always rubbed me the wrong way, because it's, it doesn't cut to the core of introversion at all. Introversion is not about not liking being around people. It's being uncomfortable, both sort of physically and mentally, when you're around people, just because you're getting too much stimulation in a certain environment. And while extroverts and, others may exhibit some of these introvert personality traits or habits that an introvert might have, they're clearly not one of us, because the very next moment after they say, oh, I'm such an introvert, they'll tell you about how they're going out with friends tonight, or gonna hit up a big party or something like that, which really is kind of a slap in the face to anybody who's actually introverted. So over the course of researching my book, I did stumble across sort of many definitions, official definitions of what an introvert is. Everybody from Merriam-Webster to the OED has a sort of definition of what they think it means. One of the coolest ones I found was actually from introvertdeer.com, and it's basically just says someone who prefers calm, minimally stimulating environments. I like that a lot more than you'll find elsewhere. For example, Merriam-Webster says that introverts typically focus on everything from our own thoughts to our own emotions internally. We deal in a lot of introspection, and that we would rather be alone. I don't really think that's true. I don't know too many introverts who are actively seeking to be alone, unless it's when they're already overstimulated and they're really trying to cool down from a dopamine spike. But that's the definition that old Miriam came up with. Another one sort of that's even worse is from the Cambridge Dictionary, and it says introverts are someone who's shy and prefers to be alone, and they liken the word to bashful, inhibited, and even mousy. And if that's not insulting, I really don't know what is. True, introverts may be shy. True, introverts may be bashful, but to call an introvert mousy just because they're sort of biologically different than anybody else and have a certain group of personality traits that are uncommon in the population, I think is just sort of really, really missing the point, and it's spreading a lot of misinformation that's getting kind of overblown out there on the internet. For a long time, the prevailing thought was that introversion was more of a sort of mental attitude, or a thought process, or thinking habit than anything. But there's been a lot of actual scientific research in the past few years about introversion and why introverts are specifically different than extroverts, and a lot of it stems from sort of brain chemistry. Several different research projects have found that introverts typically have a higher level of electrical activity in their brain, even baseline activity. So that points to the fact that their brains may be more active. It's not necessarily that they're smarter or they're thinking more. It's just that the brain is, more active in states. Another thing that's different is that we have many, many more dopamine receptors and other neurochemical receptors within our brain than a typical introvert does. The main one, of course, is dopamine, but there's also acetylcholine. Even minute amounts of those in our brain can have a major, major impact on, our anxiety levels, our thought process. It's almost like you're getting stressed in a situation that shouldn't be stressful. And extroverts are much different because they have higher tolerances for these neurochemical transmitters. They're actually actively seeking more of these. That's why you'll typically associate extroverts with kind of quote unquote thrill seeking activities like bungee jumping and stuff like that. I don't know if that really is the case, but they're actively seeking some sort of external stimulus to boost their own internal levels of neurochemical transmitters so they feel normal, whereas we can quickly get overwhelmed with these sort of chemical cocktails that are floating around inside us, and we need the time to unplug and to step back and let our brains and our emotions and our anxiety levels sort of reset to the baseline before we can feel comfortable enough to move on. In a way, dopamine sensitivity is almost I don't really want to call it a disease, but it has been linked to several clinically diagnosable diseases like ADHD, Parkinson's disease, schizophrenia. It's also associated with obesity because food will actually, the ingestion of food, the act of actually eating, will create dopamine spikes inside you. That way, you sort of get hooked on the addiction to food. So as you see on this one point, we're born this way. We're sort of pre-designed to be more susceptible to these electrochemical and neurological triggers, and at a young age, that's where a lot of the social learning aspects come into it. So when you have a very young introvert and they're experiencing these sort of dopamine spikes, they get overwhelmed. They either may shut down, pull away from groups, or they may, go the other way and kind of sort of freak out, and so the others around them, their peers and adults and everything will see this abnormal activity and they'll respond to it. And if they respond in what could be conceived as a negative way, then the introvert themselves sees their own behavior in a negative way and can do, multiple course corrections on their own to sort of negate this negative spiral that they're in. So usually you'll find introverts becoming more shy, less outgoing, more happy being alone, less likely to engage with groups or people in positions of authority, because they have learned through social exposures that their behaviors elicit this sort of negative response from others around them. So in order to isolate themselves, they physically isolate themselves or socially isolate themselves, And that's why you'll find a lot of introverts using non face to face tools for personal interaction, like the internet, a lot of writing rather than speaking, those sort of veiled social interactions. So now that we have, sort of a baseline idea of the physical aspects of introversion and how they can indeed lead to social learning that, sort of paints introversion in a negative way, let's take a look at the signs of an introverted personality type or introvert personality traits. So typically you're going to see an introvert craving quiet. That so they can, sort of focus on their own thoughts, which, in turn makes them more thoughtful, reflective, analytic, and introspective. You'll hear the term that we're, cerebral, that we spend more time in our heads. And sometimes that can be a good thing, and sometimes that can be a bad thing. We're more thoughtful about what we do. So when we do something, it's generally, the right thing to do, and it usually ends well. On the other hand, we can spend too much time sort of spinning out in our own heads and not actually acting on, what we need to do. So when it comes to decision making, we are generally decisive as introverts, but it's going to take us a long time to come to those decisions, which can be, sort of a bad thing if you're in any sort of high-paced environment at work that typically needs a decision delivered, right now in the heat of the moment. Introverts are going to struggle with that. The book that I wrote did go into some real nice tips and actual tactics you can use in situations like that to come up with ideas and decisions faster. But, for the most part, we're going to be, sort of the deer in the headlights folks. We're going to be like, whoa, I need to take a minute to think about this and I'll get back to you. So the next personality trait you're going to see is that we're going to be comfortable spending time with ourselves. We're not going to need that sort of social interaction. We're, often completely fine spending a whole day reading a book or, launching ourselves into a video game for hours and hours on end, or just, spiraling down a rabbit hole on the internet, looking up the Mandela effect, or, are we living in a simulation or something like that. I know I've myself found, hours fly by reading funny reviews for bidets on Amazon. It's just that sort of, quiet, singular activity that really speaks to me. Another trait you're going to see is that introverts would typically prefer to write than speak, and that is for personal communication, but as well as, presentation of any sort of professional idea or thought that they might need to get across. So you're gonna find a lot of introvert writers and authors, because it's a very sort of lonely task to do, but they can really get their ideas perfect, put down on paper, and delivered into the hands of people like they want it to be, but in a manner in which they're comfortable with. You're also going to see a lot of introverts that are drained after social interactions. They're going to really need some time alone to sort of, recharge their quote unquote mental battery. And you'll see this a lot. And it's actually one of the most sort of disruptive things you might have in an interpersonal relationship, specifically with, a romantic partner or a significant other, or even just a roommate. You come home from work, you're already hyped up on all this dopamine or whatever you've had from work. You walk through the door and you're just expecting some quiet time. And, whoever's in the house with you hasn't seen you all day, and they just want to talk. They want to tell you about their day, what happened. They want to hear about your day, what you did. And it can all just be too much. So, you come in already hyped up with all this layered on top of you. It's going to put you in a defensive position. You're going to shut down more. The other person is going to take it as an insult, and that's just going to spiral out of control. So that right there is sort of a real world example of where your introverted personality traits can sort of get you in trouble, and you need to know how to best, you know, not necessarily combat them, but recognize them and flip the script and utilize them as powerful tools rather than detriments. And one of the last thing is you're going to daydream a lot. I mean, you're going to fantasize because you're more, quote unquote, cerebral. You're thinking more about your decisions. So honestly, you're going to sort of play out whole scenarios in your head. I know I've had conversations that, spiral around in my head with imaginary people or imaginary conversations with real people. And I play these out so I can reenact them in real life the way I want them to, but it never ever works that way. So all of this fantasy time is just sort of wasted. But that's another trait of an introverted personality type. You're gonna sort of fantasize. That's what it's all about. Now, not every introvert is going to have all of these personality traits, and you're not going to have them all the time. And you're going to see some of these traits in extroverts, but typically, if you have, more of these traits, you're going to likely be an introvert. But, you're not in bad company when you're an introvert. Now, some of the most famous people in the world, the most powerful people in the world, the richest people in the world are definitely verifiably introverts. Do a quick search on the internet yourself and you can find a whole list of famous people. My favorite, I guess, would be, Harrison Ford, Han Solo and Indiana Jones. He is a very private person in his real life, but as an actor, he is, sort of iconic and, one in a million. And again, acting is one of those professions where you tend to find a lot of introverts because they can sort of close off their own personal life from the public and put on this very outgoing sort of facade that everybody interacts with. So if you spent any time sort of researching introversion or even just, Googling introversion, you're of course going to come across all these, personality trait tests that are going to be able to tell you if you're an introvert and what kind of introvert you are. And of course, the most famous is the Myers-Briggs. That breaks personality types down into 16 groups, 8 of which are introverts, 8 of which are extroverts. Just a quick rundown of the 8 introvert types from the Myers-Briggs. You're going to have introverted sensing, thinking, judging, introverted sensing, feeling, judging, introverted intuitive, feeling, judging, introverted intuitive, thinking, judging, introverted sensing, thinking, perceiving, introverted sensing, feeling, perceiving, introverted, intuitive, feeling, perceiving, and so on. I think the Myers-Briggs is a little overcomplicated and it tends to pigeonhole people a little too deeply. Really, you can take that sort of 8 personality types and lump them basically into 4 different types. And you get the same sort of benefit without all the minutia. So the first of those is going to be the social introvert. And this is the sort of, wallflower that you've seen depicted in, movies and television shows for years. It's going to be the person who, is not completely isolated. They have a very small group of friends. They're, outgoing in their group, but don't tend to expand beyond that group. It's your typical, Dungeons and Dragons dork, or your, band dork, or, the fraternity geeks from Revenge of the Nerds, that sort of idea that, within their own group, they're very gregarious and outgoing, but they're very limited as to who they allow into their group or to which groups they go into. The next type is you're going to have your thinking introverts. These are the people that, kind of get lost in their own heads. Not only are these going to be sort of, just daydreamers, people that just kind of fantasize about what they should do, what they could do, what they're going to do, but it's also the people that, sort of overanalyze everything they think about. And that might be a good thing or a bad thing depending how they're using that sort of trait. It'd be perfect for a data analyst to have that sort of personality trait, because they're going to spend a lot of time with their, facts and figures. And if it's just driving them bonkers that their only friends are, numbers and data files, it's probably not going to be good for them. The other type that is sort of more well known is the anxious introvert. So these sort of people are the ones that actively isolate themselves because their natural state is natural anxiety state is sort of elevated. So any little thing that's out of the ordinary is really going to ratchet up their stress response, and they're really going to shut down. They're going to withdraw. They're going to be spending a lot of time alone, not interacting with anybody. So, and the perfect example of this that I can think of, I'm a Gen Xer, so I'm thinking of Ali Sheedy's character from The Breakfast Club. She dresses, in sort of pseudo proto goth, doesn't speak throughout the most of the movie, spends her time all by herself doing weird stuff, and she's not even really caring that anybody else is looking at her. So that's the sort of anxious introvert that you're going to come across. And the last type that you can, sort of boil this massive Myers-Briggs matrix down to is the restrained or the inhibited introvert. So these people are going to really spend a lot of time in their own heads before making a decision. So this is the type of introvert that's really going to struggle with any sort of life change or any professional change. They're going to really push back against that change, because in their mind, they really need to lock all the puzzle pieces in place before they can pull the trigger on a decision. That's sort of similar to your thinking introverts, but the key here is the restraint. They're almost prohibiting themselves from acting until everything is locked in place, whereas a thinking introvert is more open to sort of adapting on the fly. So there you have, what I consider to be the 4 basic types of introvert personalities. And, of course, you're going to have all sorts of traits that, one of those personality types is going to have more than others, or express more than others. But one thing I did come across the internet when I was actually doing keyword research for the blog post, trying to drive traffic because I want to get my message out there to the people. One of the biggest questions that people ask when they research introversion is there a cure for being an introvert? And this just struck me as so sort of wrong that it's just at a basic level, these people think that there's something wrong with them, that introversion is wrong, and it's not. Introversion is just a personality type that exists. Introverts have just as much worth as anybody else. They contribute to society just as anybody else does. They, provide valuable input. They make great relationships with those that they choose to bring into their relationships. They are, stand-up people. They, have morals that guide them. It just blows my mind that people want to cure their introversion. And, that's sort of a symptom of what, Susan Cain calls this negative bias, this bias towards extroverts that our Western society has really embraced over the years. And she in her TED Talk goes back to speak about how introverts were actually, people with introvert traits, I should say, introverted personality types, were more revered before the Industrial Revolution because people had to be more self-reliant. They had to take care of themselves. They had to, keep their heads on straight. They had to take care of their family. They weren't, taking these big risks on, building companies like, Henry Ford, or, being the first to, fly solo like Charles Lindbergh, or, any of the sort of big sort of aggrandizing, activities. But once the Industrial Revolution sort of happened, all this wealth was being consolidated in the hands of a very few people, and that wealth sort of brought along a sort of fame to it. The fame brought along a lot of envy, and so people started mimicking these sort of bigger personalities, these larger than life people. I mean, you can see it with the birth of Hollywood, when, a single actress would adopt a hairstyle, and the entire country, all the women in the country would soon have this hairstyle, whether it's, bobbed hair or marcelled hair, or, you know, Bonnie and Clyde. You look at Bonnie and Clyde, probably two of the most famous outlaws in American history. Women all over the country cut their hair like Bonnie. They started dressing like Bonnie, all because she had this sort of cult of personality built up around her. Her, extroverted personality type, her larger than life character, really inspired them to sort of shift and mimic her. And that's the sort of origin of this bias against introverts. So from way back when, 1920s, 1800s, that sort of time, we're building this culture that really doesn't place the value it should on introverts. So by the time you get to like the 1980s, you get a lot of people who are growing up with these introvert personality types in a world that's completely controlled by extroverts. The world has completely been rebuilt to suit extroverts and to promote extroverts and to value extroverts. And we have this natural tendency to sort of minimize the contribution of introverts. So fast forward again with the growth of the internet, and you have a ton of people out there thinking that there's something wrong with them just because they're biologically different than, a large segment of the population. And you have a lot of people looking for a cure to that. And, that kernel of an idea is really what started me on this sort of process of introspection and personal growth, and, sort of writing this book and building this website and this online community, because there's nothing wrong with being an introvert. You can do anything you want to do being an introvert. It might take you a little while longer, and you might have to adapt to work in a world built for extroverts, but you have the tools right inside your own mind to do that. It's those same introverted personality traits that people have been telling you for years are wrong or bad or sort of less than. You just take those, you recognize the value in them, you learn to apply them correctly, and they become super powerful tools. They become, superpowers that allow you to do pretty much anything you ever wanted to do. And I'm speaking from experience here. This little blurb on the back of my book, how when I was a kid, not really a kid, I was like 10 or 11, I faked being sick and spent hours in a snow-covered car just so I didn't have to go to Thanksgiving dinner with some of my family members. Looking back on that, I should have been embarrassed that I spent the whole time in a car, but at the moment, I was just happy that I didn't have to go and engage with people that I only saw 2 or 3 times a year, who, yes, they're family, and yes, I love them in a sort of basic sort of familial way, but I couldn't really connect with them because they were all very outgoing, gregarious, conversant, sort of jovial people. And here I was getting stressed out because, there was 4 of them in a room. But, fast forward 20 years and, climbing up the chain in the retail grocery world, taking on leadership roles and taking on more responsibility and, bringing, employees under me and training them and helping them to grow in their own careers, and, you know, getting noticed by my supervisors and getting promotions and getting raises. And, it's really a night and day change. And all I really did was accept the fact that I was an introvert, that I had certain personality traits that had been limiting what I could do, that were holding me back, but they were valuable, and they were the sort of things I really could use to turn my life around and really claw out some success for myself. So you have, hundreds of thousands of people in this country alone, maybe millions, thinking that there's something wrong with them, when all they really need to do is sort of reframe their state of mind and see that there's nothing wrong, that they have all the tools they need to succeed. They just need to apply them differently and sort of rethink how they relate to the world and everyone else in it. So that really is, the impetus for this whole project. And it boils down to the fact that I was frustrated by the information I found on the internet, because it continued to paint introverts in a negative light, when I knew from personal experience that introverts can really do anything they want to do. So it was my goal to create this website and to write this book and preach this message out there that there's nothing wrong with you. You just need to embrace those sort of skills that you already have and use them to your advantage, rather than embracing them in a negative way and sort of allowing them to hold you back. And that's my underlying message to you, that I have faith in you, that you have that greatness within you, that you have that capability within you. And, we're all here to help you bring it out and to make the most of it, and to, carve out the sort of life that you want to live, whether it's, a super successful leader in the retail world, whether it's, an entrepreneur starting your own business from home, whether it's just, getting along better with the people you work with at work so you're happier in your job, or, learning how to tell your loved ones what you need to tell them in order to stabilize and to build and maintain those core relationships that even introverts rely upon so much. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that. So again, I'd like to remind you that the Introvert's Guide to Wealth is out in Kindle, paperback, and hardcover editions. So you can go grab yourself a copy of that. And if you would be so kind to leave me a review on Amazon, that would be awesome. And until next time, I guess, keep on keeping on.